Hi, good evening. Welcome to the Art Deco Society talk on the automobile mascots of René Lalique. We'll be starting in a couple of minutes. We're just waiting for more people to join. So if you just enjoy our beautiful first screen, it'll give you a little taste of what we're about to see. We will get started in just a couple of minutes. Okay, I think we'll start with a little bit of housekeeping while everybody's joining. As usual, this is a webinar format, which means that you can see us, but we can't see you. So please do feel free to relax with a cup of tea or a glass of wine and get into your pajamas, and nobody's gonna judge you for that. We're not going to be able to hear anything from your side either, so there's no need to go on mute. If you would like to comment or ask questions, please use the chat function or the Q&A box. We're going to take questions at the end. We've got about 10 minutes or so at the end for questions. If you've got any problems, again, and you can't hear us, please put that in the chat and we will try and resolve that. As always, please be mindful that other people can see your comments, and if we could just abide by the usual rules of no bad language and being kind to each other, that would be very helpful. If you would like to see more of the events we've got going on over the summer, we've got more events up on the Art Deco Society website. We've got an in-person walk as well, so please do go and have a look at that and book yourselves on to our future talks. So for this talk, I would like to introduce Nick Dawes, who is the Senior Vice President at Heritage Auctions and a former Sotheby's auctioneer. He grew up in Shropshire and moved to New York in 1979. He's the author of 4 standard works on decorative arts, including Art Deco, co-written with Judith Miller, Lalique glass, and bespoke mascots. Nick is considered the country's leading expert on the work of René Lalique and has appeared regularly on the US version of Antiques Roadshow since the first airing 30 years ago. So we're absolutely delighted and honoured to have Nick with us, and I think this is his first talk on this particular subject, so it's going to be a very exciting talk. And without further ado, I will go on mute, and Nick, over to you, please.
Well, thank you, Laura. I'd like to thank all members of the Art Deco Society in the UK, especially Ruthie, who invited me and was so patient with me when I was hard to find earlier this year. But delighted to be with you all, and good evening. Yeah, it's a pleasure for me to talk about what is one of my favorite subjects, Art Deco, and in particularly the work of René Lalique, who we know, I think, mainly through his work in glass, but I'd like to talk a little more about him, his life and times, his beginnings, and lead up to his work in glass car mascots. We're looking at the introductory slide, which is perhaps the best known in many ways of his mascots, and certainly is most iconic in terms of representing the era. It's the mascot known as Victoire, Victory, which I believe is connected to 1789 as much as it is to 1925. It's inspired by paintings and the work of Jacques-Louis David, representing the victory of the French citoyenne in 1789 and the French Revolution. Lalique was very much a historian in many ways. Here are two portraits of him. The photograph shows René Lalique in 1903 in his studio in Paris on the Cours la Reine. The building is still there, by the way. You can visit it, at least on the outside, and see the magnificent glass doors and the facade that he designed in 1902 and moved into in 1903. The second portrait is a painting done by his daughter, Suzanne Lalique, in 1926, so 23 years later. And they depict Lalique at the height of both of his careers. Unlike many creative individuals, he pursued and mastered two very distinct careers. The first as a jeweler, the pinnacle of which really was the Paris exhibition of 1900, by which time he was 40 years old. He was born in 1860, and arguably the most fashionable, the most successful, the most popular jeweler in Paris, if not in the world, Paris being the center of all things luxury at the time. The second portrait shows him at the height of his second career, and perhaps better known as a glassmaker, painted, as I say, in 1926, just after the exhibition which we're all talking about right now, the Paris exhibition of 1925. So he's different. He's gray. He's a little chubbier. This happens, by the way, and he's wearing glasses. I believe that one reason he gave up his career as a jeweler, which could have been a very elegant and lucrative one, was that his eyesight began to fail and he didn't have the ability to work with the minute detail that a jeweler requires. There are other reasons. Basically, he'd mastered jewelry and was looking for new challenges. But in both of the portraits, he's actually doing exactly the same thing, something that perhaps he did most of through his career and arguably did best. He's drawing. There are extraordinary drawings, a collection of them, mostly in the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, some in the Musée d'Orsay, and some in the Musée Lalique in Paris in Alsace. And they show his ability as a graphic artist remarkably. There are no drawings by Lalique for glass mascots, and very, very few for glass at all. Almost all of them relate to his jewelry making. His first career as a jeweler was largely in his studios in Paris, where he lived on the top floor. He had galleries on the lower two floors and atelier studios in between. But he becomes a glassmaker really by 1905 and 6. He starts experimenting more and more with putting glass into his jewelry and making glass objects, decorative objects, sometimes including silver and other metals. At about this time, he meets Francois Coty, the perfume maker, who takes a store next door to Paris, to Lalique on the Place Vendôme in Paris. And Coty ultimately commissions Lalique to start making perfume bottles for him. Lalique designs and makes the perfume bottles and some of the packaging, and it leads to an enormous perfume making empire for Lalique, and even more so for Francois Coty, who kind of parts company with Lalique some 10 years later. But this is a big part of Lalique's glassmaking career and success, and still is, arguably, in the modern Lalique company. But his first factory is a rather small and rather simple one, shortly outside of Paris, where he is limited in what he can make. It's not really until after the First World War that Lalique becomes a glassmaker fully blown. He opens a new factory. The First War, of course, allows for French industry to expand into the recently acquired, or reacquired, if you like, from Germany, Alsace region, which is ideal for making glass. Several big factories, Baccarat, Saint Louis, had been there in history. And Lalique opens a new factory. This is a photograph inside it in 1921. He starts the planning for it right after the Treaty of Versailles, and 2 years later, there it is. It's still there, this factory. There's a modern photo of it. I've been there many times. And if you go today, you can't get in the factory unless you're very persuasive. But you can go to the Lalique Museum, which is just a few minutes away, and well worth seeing. If you like Lalique, it's an extraordinary collection of the work of René Lalique and some of his followers. So the new factory allowed Lalique to do all manner of things, to make things on a much larger scale. He could make architectural glass, he could cast, he could make large vases and things like that he couldn't make before the war, and also make them in greater numbers. Mass production was essentially what Lalique was all about at this time. He was not, like, I don't know, Émile Gallet or Louis Comfort Tiffany. He was not an artisanal glassmaker. He was artisanal in jewelry making to a certain extent, but glassmaking for Lalique was all about how to do it the most efficiently, how to do it with the least amount of waste, how to do it mechanically. So let's look at what he made. The new factory allowed him to make, as I say, almost anything. And prior to the 1920s, glassmaking was limited to decorative objects and mostly vases and a few other things. Lalique decided anything you could use in the home, or outside the home for that matter, he would make. Literally thousands of different models. And when you think about the fact that he didn't really start making glass commercially till he was about 50, how the number of things that he has made and left us as a legacy is quite remarkable, and I think quite encouraging, really, for those of us who might be over 50 to think about, what am I going to do next? But the concept of the glass car mascot is something that I believe he invented. He didn't invent the car mascot. The car, of course, is very much coincident with René Lalique's lifetime. So he was born in 1860, died in 1945. So if you think about that, it's almost the entire period that we see what we call the modern movement born and come to fruition. The whole thing unfolds over those 85 years. And René Lalique was very much protagonist in this movement, very much on the front line all the way through. Many of the things he created were his own innovative concept, including the car mascot. Car mascots are not quite as old as cars, but they certainly predate René Lalique's glassmaking career. The first of them before 1910, and certainly by the 19-teens, before the First World War even, car mascots were relatively well known. Here's a Rolls Royce with perhaps one of the best known of all car mascots of all time, the Spirit of Ecstasy, designed by Charles Sykes in 1911. And the concept of a car mascot was something rather personal. I wrote a book about them not too long ago, and I compared them to a gentleman's tie. It's the only part of the whole thing, the whole sort of makeup, that doesn't do anything. It's the only part of your outfit that's decorative. So, and you can, like a tie, you could change them. They could be taken on and off, and you could use whatever kind of represents your style, your mood, perhaps. The MG owner on this one was probably a pilot, for instance. The other one shows Rudolph Valentino in about 1925 with a mascot that he made famous. he was the star of a movie named Cobra, and this is a mascot he preferred. So it was very much a gentleman's thing, but you could, there were all kinds of different concepts in the 20s. All of them made of metal, I should say. If you want to know more about mascots in general, metal ones in particular, I can highly recommend this book that I wrote some 10 years ago, Bespoke Mascots. And one of the first things I say in the book is mascots are not hood ornaments. This is a hood ornament. A hood ornament is an ornament for the hood of a car. And automobile design changes around the mid to late 30s, and certainly any time after the Second World War, so that the radiator cap that the mascots were originally designed to fit on pretty much disappears with few exceptions. And the hood of the car becomes aerodynamic and sloped, and so you can put a sloped aerodynamic ornament along the top of it, like this one made for a Pontiac in the late 30s. But what we're looking at in the Lalique is not are not hood ornaments, they're mascots. When René Lalique was opening his new factory in 1921, he was looking forward. He was looking forward to being a glassmaker. And he knew there would be another great exhibition in Paris. The 1900 exhibition had propelled him to the level of superiority he enjoyed in jewelry making. He knew there was going to be another one. There hadn't been another one, but 1925 was looming. There were a lot of things that got in the way, the First World War being a primary problem. And when it did come around, René Lalique took massive advantage of it. It's the exhibition, of course, from which we get the term Art Deco. But I'm going to let you know that when I was born, Art Deco didn't exist. And any of us over the age of 60 can say that, because as you know, Art Deco is a term that was not coined until 1966. So what did people call this stuff in the period? Well, there were various terms for it. My favorite is Esprit Nouveau, the new spirit, which was used at the 1925 exhibition to describe the sort of more cutting edge things. Art moderne was a term. But one term of the period was simply le style Lalique, the Lalique style. The style of Lalique, René Lalique, was so distinctive and frankly so good that people were quite happy to call anything that looked even vaguely like Lalique or was Lalique, le style Lalique. And you walked into the 1925 exhibition through the Porte d'Honneur, the magnificent gates by Edgar Brandt. What do you see? First thing you see is this huge illuminated fountain. Imagine walking into this at night. By René Lalique. To the right of it, you can see René Lalique's pavilion. He had many other exhibitions throughout the site of the exhibition. But there was no question that René Lalique was the star of the show. And he used it to launch a new line. The Eiffel Tower is arguably the star of Paris, built for the 1889 exhibition, of course. And in 1925, Citroën, the French automobile company, kind of commandeered it and used it as a huge advertising board. I'm not sure they could do that today. But René Lalique picked up on that, saw the power of the automobile in contemporary society. There was a huge display of automobiles at the 1925 exhibition. And he launched his first bouchon de radiateur, which means radiator stopper. It's an object designed to go on the radiator cap and to decorate it, you know. This one is the first one that was launched. It's called 5 chevaux, 5 horses, for obvious reasons. Citroën, not coincidentally, had a popular car model called the 5 chevaux, the 5-horse car. But look how exquisite that is. It's made relatively simply by pressing it into pressing it into a mold. And this one is shown on a cap, which was made at the time and designed exclusively, custom designed for René Lalique mascots to be used on the radiator cap and to illuminate the object. These were sold through various sources, but the primary retailer who actually made the mascot mounts was in London, Briefs Galleries, in Knightsbridge. Here are some original brochures from Briefs showing you the range of mascots. There were 29 in all by the early 30s. And also it shows you how to mount them and all the other business that you needed if you wanted to be a fashionable motorist with a Lalique mascot up front. I love this photograph from Briefs in the late 20s. It's a promotional photo showing a Lalique table with Lalique glassware on it. Briefs sold anything Lalique, you know, not just the mascots. I especially like this petrified shop girl who's sitting there on what must be the most inappropriate chair for the table. There is sort of William and Mary style chair. But Briefs is where you got your mascots from and where you got the mounting. They put their mark on them. And inside, they included a bulb, and you could rig the whole thing up through a an electrical system to your battery. And if you wanted to, you could put a little glass filter, colored filter, in between the mascot and the light source. Briefs sold these too with a range. You could buy different colors, you know, green and red and blue and all that. Again, to suit your mood. The mascot mounts are actually quite rare today, arguably rarer than the mascots themselves. And collectors love to find them in original condition with their original mascots on them. But they allowed you to mount them and, as I say, illuminate them. There's a nice Victoire on a Duesenberg. So let's look at some Lalique mascots. This is one of my favorites. It's called the large dragonfly, Grand Libellule. He made mascots in two different sizes, basically. It is, after all, an automobile part. So there needs to be a standardization of size. And mascots were either large or small, related to the size of the mount, or specifically the size of the round base on the mascot. Most Lalique glass, if it's a vase or something, is marked on the bottom underneath. But of course, if you're putting something on a mounting, you can't see underneath. So Lalique, all of Lalique mascots are signed also above the mount level. This is the signature on the Grand Libellule. Beautiful thing. And as you can see, it's basically naturalistic. You know, Lalique admired flora and fauna, especially that with natural symmetry, which all animals and creatures have. And very often he would simply render it, sculpt it naturalistically. We'll see other ways he did it later on. This is the small dragonfly, Petite Libellule. But you see, it's just really just captured the dragonfly in that moment when it lands for a millisecond, you know, before it takes off again. Beautiful thing. And they represent not just flight and the concept of moving swiftly, but also a natural elegance. So perfect for a car mascot, I think. This one, rather feminine. The large and small sizes really relate to the large and small vehicles at the time. You know, if you're driving a Hispano Suiza, you've got a big one. If you've got a little roadster, you have the little one. Here are two mascots of the same size, both of the small base. The Archer is, again, a popular theme in automobilia at the time. as is St. Christopher, the patron saint, of course, of travelers. The archer on the right was made in the late 1920s. The signature is molded, and then next to it, France is cut in with a wheel. This was done partly for export purposes. St. Christopher is also very clearly marked Lalique, France, although this one was made in about 1990. It's the only piece of Lalique that I know of that was reproduced, remade, as the Lalique company tends to do, with the original Lalique signature entirely intact and evident. But there it is. So be careful of that if you're collecting. Some of the St. Christopher mascots are from the period. They were designed in the late 20s and made through the 30s. But some of them, like this one, are later. And you can tell the modern ones, if you like, are, and you can even pick it up in this, the glass is kind of more clear and crystal-like, you might say, little and much heavier, a little thicker and heavier owing to the higher lead content than an old one. And no imperfections. You know, you see little bubbles and little bits, little lines in the old ones, which we kind of like. You don't see that in the modern one. I say that the mascots were in two sizes, large and small base, basically. And this design feature dates to 1920, in fact, 5 years before René Lalique actually introduced anything as a mascot. And it comes from these two on the flanks of this image. You can see on what is my right, the smaller figure called Sirène, where she's kind of curling up, rather Raphael-esque, I always think, in the deeper opalescence. She's the small size base. And opposite her is Naiad, which is larger, a couple of inches taller, the large size base. These were not originally conceived or sold as mascots. They were sold as statuettes or presse-papier, paperweights. Lalique was, of course, a merchant of the highest order and sold many things in different ways. So you could buy these objects as car mascots, you could buy them as statuettes, you could buy them as paperweights, and so on, different things. We'll see more as we go along. Opalescent glass is particularly effective in Lalique in general, and I think especially in Lalique statuary. And he tended to, as you can see on the Sirène, use patina, which is kind of the concept he learned from Japanese ivory carving, to make the object much stronger in every respect in terms of its modeling. In the middle, I put a Sabino mascot in opalescence, mainly to show you just how good Lalique is, frankly. Sabino was perhaps the biggest rival at the time. It's just not anywhere near as good in terms of its sculptural ability and its overall aesthetic. Here's another great figural mascot by Lalique on the left. It's called Vitesse, or Speed. And I think Lalique has not only created a superb piece of statuary and sculpture, you know, is there a better piece of glass sculpture of the time than that? But it's also highly emblematic of its day. This is the age of speed, you know, and look at that figure. The other object is not a mascot, although it's often favored and collected by mascot collectors, or as we call them, mascoteers. It's a statuette made as a commemorative. The lettering on the bottom tells you it was made for a railway line, the Côte d'Azur Pullman line that went from Paris to the Côte d'Azur. And this was the inaugural run in 1929. If you were lucky enough to be on that train, you got one of these. I'm not sure if everybody got one, but some people did. And they exist today, but another great example of Lalique's ability as a sculptor, I think. It kind of almost has the head of the Victoire, which we see here on its Breves mounting. You'll notice that this one has a kind of faint amethystine tint. This is what collectors look for. We love this because it's evident that it's been outside. An amethystine tint in Lalique Mascot means that it's been in the sun, perhaps for an element, for a period of time. It's been used, and we like that. This is a great one. What do we look for in a great mascot? Amethyst tint, and of course, a nice original mounting and fine condition. Nothing damaged underneath, the tip of it all there and all that. Hard to find. You know, imagine speeding around the countryside in this and keeping it safe and unchipped. Here's two more with amethyst tints. The famous eagle head on the right, the dagler and the little, which is a large version, and the little grenouille or frog on the left there. Again, for a large or a small car. What else represents speed? Well, greyhounds do pretty well. And so Lalique has this elegant greyhound representing speed as a mascot. Again, it's a small base. Just a simple plaque of glass. But look how well modeled that is. Every little hair is done naturalistically. Greyhounds were commonly used in metal mascots too. And this is perhaps the rarest of all Lalique mascots. It's another greyhound, what it was referred to in the Lalique archives as Levier number 1, greyhound number 1. But you're not going to see this, I expect. It was made exclusively for a member of the royal family, Prince George, the Duke of Kent, in about 1929. He was a great fan. He was the 4th son, by the way, of George V. So he wasn't going to make it to the throne. But classic royal in many ways. He loved all the good life. And he loved greyhound racing. And this was given to him. He loved cars too. So it's sort of natural he got a greyhound car mascot. We handled this. We sold it some years ago. And I nicknamed it the Royal Blue and gave it a blue filter. But it's a fabulous thing. I believe it was, it's modeled on Mick the Miller, who was perhaps the most famous of all racing greyhounds, who won the British Derby for greyhounds in 1929, the year it was made. Great thing. We know of one and possibly two that exist. This one was found in India about 6-7 years ago. Racehorses, another great representation of speed and elegance. Lalique took advantage of that. This is the Epsom racetrack in about 1930. And this is the Lalique mascot called Epsom, made around that time. One of 4 mascots representing horses. We saw the 5 horses already. Here's 2 more, very similar. The one with the double mane, as we call it, is called Longchamp, after the French race course. And the one opposite with the single mane is also called Longchamp. They're called Longchamp A and Longchamp B. Longchamp A is rarer. They didn't make so many. I think it was perhaps difficult to make. So they made the simpler version. Both of these are shown as Lalique offered them, as well as offering them as mascots, as bookends, c'est livre. You could buy this with this original black glass base. The base is signed à Lalique France as a bookend. You buy them in pairs, of course. The Longchamp B has a what we call a French collar, a simple chrome collar, which Brives did not make, but Lalique made these, and you could get these, or they supplied these at least. You could get these collars. But bookends were a relatively popular thing at the time, and it's a good way to buy a mascot, because very often these mascots, which is a pure mascot, there's nothing else about it, were very well protected by being on the bookend base. And you can always pop them off and put them on a car or do whatever you want with them. Here's the Longchamp B again, with a very similar one. But if you look carefully at these two, you'll see that the one on the left, as I'm looking at it, is slightly pale green in color. It was made in Massachusetts by a company called Persons Majestic, who were active in the 30s. Excuse me. Mostly they made bicycles and automobile parts and all sorts of stuff. But they made a few mascots, copies basically of Lalique. They copied the Victoire and they copied the Longchamp, and they did it very closely. You know, they tend to be slightly pale green in color, you can tell, and they're clearly marked. So, you know, here's the marks. The two marks on the bottom are the marks going around the base of the Persons Majestic one. The marks on the top are the Lalique Longchamp. But Paris in the later 20s, when the mascots were at their height of popularity, was also fascinated by its colonial world, its colonial empire, if you like, and all things French colonial. If you are an Art Deco fan and scholar, you'll know about all this, the sort of sun worship element of Art Deco. And this really culminates in the Paris Exposition Coloniale in 1931, which, by the way, there are bits of still existing in Paris. You can go to the original site and see some of the architecture. And Lalique dwelled on this and was kind of commercially used the concept of the French colonies in some of his designs, mostly in vases and other things, but in some mascots. The creature in the center, coq-u-din, is basically a jungle cockerel of a type that doesn't really exist in France, but does in parts of the French colonial world. And look at the way this is not naturalistic. He has completely stylized this geometrically. Geometric stylization is something we kind of take for granted in good Art Deco. I was in Paris this week. I went to the Paul Poiret exhibition at the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, which is, if you haven't been yet, you have to get on a train or a plane or something and go and see it. It's fantastic. It's there till January. But, you know, Paul Poiret is, or as far as I'm concerned, where Art Deco begins. And that's another lecture, by the way, which I talk about what Art Deco is, specifically perhaps with the work of Paul Éribe. But Paul Éribe creates this rose, and he's really the first guy to geometrically stylize anything. And this is 1910. You know, this is not the interwar years. You should not sacrifice the rose on the altar of the machine, says Paul Éribe. And Lalique adopted and understood that. He doesn't sacrifice anything by using geometric stylization, which some of the less talented Art Deco designers tended to do. Well, I love that one. Again, shown there as a bookend. Another cockerel, a more mundane one, but nothing mundane about the way Lalique depicts it. The coq-nain, the dwarf cockerel. Beautiful thing. Not many of these were made in colors. The coq-nain, for some reason, was made also in this sort of what I call topaz color. And you'll notice, if you look carefully on the base, the claws of the cockerel kind of protrude around the edge of the base. Now, if you're going to stick it on a Breves mount, you have to polish those away because it won't fit. So as I say, these were sold as presse-papier, as paperweights, and as statuettes, and that's what that is. If you wanted it as a mascot, which some people did, they had to have the claws polished away. This is not unique. This is another one that you had to do that with. The hirondelle, or the swallow, shown here as a pair of bookends. Beautiful creatures these are. But they also have protruding claws which have to be polished away to make a mascot or a bookend. Great ones with their original bases and French collars. But look at all the bits of that could get chipped. Tips of the wings, tips of the tail, the beak, the whole thing. Finding them perfect is a rare and beautiful thing. Some more mascots, another bird here, the falcon, shown in a nice amethyst tint. Falcon was, I think, the most popular of all the mascots in the British Isles. So we see quite a few of them for some reason in Britain. I don't know whether Greaves had a deal on them or whatever and made them the sort of, flavor of the month, but they sold a lot of them. And the falcon, of course, is arguably, perhaps more so in Britain than anywhere, a great symbol of speed, fastest bird I think there is, and strength and elegance and everything that, the Art Deco motorist wants to represent. The ram's head, tête de bélier, more Gallic perhaps. I'm not sure who wanted this. I can understand a lot of people wanting a falcon. A ram's head, I don't know. But there's something very neoclassical about it and very elegant in that manner. And this one is nicely decorated with patina to enhance it. And who would want these? The one in color is called sanglier. It's a wild boar of a type that was relatively common in the forests of Alsace, which Lalique would have seen. He had a house there near the factory. I'm sure he would have encountered these creatures. And he makes it beautiful in a way that perhaps no one had done since, well, the Roman Empire. The Romans made boars in bronze. Between them, nobody really bothered, And who would want a boar on their cart? I don't know. I think they sold these mostly as paperweights. I've spoken to people who were in the Lalique factory in 1944 when the American infantry went through and took it back from the Germans who were occupying. And one gentleman who had one of these boars in this color said, oh yeah, the guys in the factory told me to take what I wanted. He said there was about 100 of these on a shelf. So I suspect they didn't sell that many. And for that matter, who would want the creature on the right, which is called a pintade, which is basically a guinea hen, something you eat. It's not really a sort of decorative bird in any way. And I suspect they sold very few of these, which is why the pintade is a rare mascot. You see very few of them, really. But nicely presented, that one. And Lalique was not afraid to represent the ordinary. The boar is an ordinary creature, as is the pintade, domesticated fowl, as is the perch, a very ordinary fish. There's nothing exotic about the perch. It's not a jungle creature. It's just an ordinary, very ordinary fish. But he liked the ordinary. He loved ordinary creatures. Sparrows were arguably his most popular bird, together with swallows. But this you could see. I could see this as a mascot, or perhaps more likely as a paperweight. Very effective indeed in opalescence. The owl lends itself very, very well to geometric stylization, as you can see here. By 1930, or certainly by the early 30s, 31, 32, 33, automobile design was beginning to change. And the prominent radiator cap that you fix these onto was less and less in modern automobile design. They became more sloped, more aerodynamic, as I say, and the radiator itself went inside the engine cowling. So by the time this was designed in 1931, there was less demand for mascots. And this is one reason perhaps why the owl is extremely rare today. The owl, or Ibu, and the the fox, Renard, both designed in the early 30s, are the rarest of the Lalique mascots, outside the royal blue, and subsequently the most valuable. Certainly well into 6 figures at auction today for a really, really good one. People often ask me, how many did they make? And I said, well, I know the answer to that. They made as many as they could sell. And, this was commercial enterprise. And they sold a lot of, certain models in the 20s, by the 30s, I think they were selling fewer and fewer car mascots, at least. And this one didn't get much sale at all because it's immensely rare. And I suspect this was difficult to make too, and inexpensive to make, so they perhaps kind of gave up on it. Show you a few Lalique mascots and others, rivals, if you like, just to show you how good Lalique was. Look at the quality of modeling on that, the elegance of it all compared to, in this case, a Sabino one. Just doesn't have it. Nobody else could do that. Comet, and by Lalique, the bigger one, and a rival Comet on a mount. Again, it looks kind of, I don't know, very inferior in so many ways. Very rare mascot too, the Comet. I've had a few. Once encountered someone who had two of them mounted on the wings of their airplane in the 1930s. Yes, you could put them there too. Lalique Company, of course, still exists. It's still making glass in the same factory that Lalique opened in 1921. And I'll just wind up with a few images of what they still make. The company still makes some models, not all of these, but these are all models that were made well into the 2000s. They recently discontinued a few, but you could buy all of these into the 2000s. They're modern glass, so they're heavier than the old ones and a little brighter, if you like, and much less expensive. You can buy them very inexpensively. They made the eagle head and a couple of other models as bookends after World War II. These were both made in the 60s with these frosted glass bases. They stopped making them, I think, in the 70s. But these are pretty nice. The company made a limited edition model of the Spirit of Ecstasy in the early 90s. Here's one. They're quite rare. They claimed they were making 200, I think, in limited edition, but I don't think they made that many. It was not a successful enterprise, so they're a pretty rare thing to find today. The Lalique Spirit of Ecstasy, nice object though. And people do like to buy the modern ones, that is tête de coq, and put them on their car. I don't see that. I go to automobile exhibitions and someone has a $1 million car from 1928, and everything's original. Everything is totally authentic and perfect, except for the car mascot. They'll put a new one on the front. Why not put an old one on? Get it right. A couple more modern Laliques. I like the blue peacock very, very much. It's very comparable to the original blue tête de pont or peacock head, which was made in clear glass and in blue. And the blue ones are very rare. They sell for $50,000, $60,000, But this is a nice one. Lalique Company sells it with a little metal sort of cap underneath that you can just drop it into. And the boar in red is a very rare thing. It was made to commission by a football team, I think, an American football team in Alabama, for whom this is the mascot in the 1990s. You don't see them very often, but it's kind of a cool thing. I like this too. This is a modern version of Victoire made in deep opalescence. It looks pretty much like the old Victoire, except the base is bigger. For some reason, they didn't use the size of the original base. It's sort of bigger, so you couldn't fit it into a mount without polishing it. But these are quite successful, I think. And that's about it for modern Lalique. The only other thing I'll mention, and I'm wearing one. I love it. I love this thing. Lalique in the 1990s made watches called Mascot, Lalique Mascot, and the bezel of the watch looks like a mascot mount, Kind of a cool thing. Anyway, that's all I would like to say. But we do have time for some questions, I think. If if anyone has any, I'll do my best to answer them if I can.
Yes, thank you, Nick. That was absolutely fascinating. Gorgeous photos of those. Yeah, if you've got any questions, please do put them either in the chat box or in the Q&A box, and I will ask them. I have a couple of questions, though, just to get us started. Are you a mascoteer yourself? And if so, do you have any currently in your collection?
Well, that's a good question. You know, I was a dealer in Lalique for 20 years, and most dealers don't collect anything. I do own a few mascots, not many, but like most dealers, and I'm still a dealer at one level, anything I own is for sale, more or less. So I don't have the collector gene within me. I collect 18th century wine glasses and porcelain from Shropshire. But I had some Lalique. I do like, I'm being flippant, but I like Lalique very much. I have a few things of Lalique that I wouldn't sell. Maybe I wouldn't sell one mascot, but yeah.
And which is the mascot that you would hold on to?
I have a nice Victoire, you know.
Lovely.
Yeah.
That is beautiful. It's beautiful. And so were the mascots in the Lalique ones and more generally, were they considered luxury items or were they affordable and kind of readily available for everybody?
Well, that's a good question. Lalique today is considered a luxury brand, if you like, and was to a certain extent at the time, but much less so than it is today. They were far more affordable than modern Lalique is. You know, we saw pictures of small automobiles, which were not terribly expensive. I mean, you have to be a little bit wealthy to have a car at all in the interwar years, at least that would support a mascot. But no, they were affordable. They were considered a little, how can we say, not exactly luxurious, but a little kind of exclusive. And there were people, I've read reports of people in the streets of Paris in the 1920s and 30s, communist people who didn't like wealth, who would smash them. They'd go around and if they saw one, they'd smash it with a hammer. So that this was, there was a sort of degree of people being upset about them, but it's very, very limited. That no, they weren't really exclusive, expensive things.
Okay, thank you. We do have a couple of questions coming up. So, from Duncan, I think this is actually a related question. So perhaps I missed it, but how much would these have cost at the time, and how much would they go for now? I know that you did say they were more affordable at the time, and you've mentioned over six figures for some of the rarer ones, but kind of in general.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's 29 mascots in the range, not including the rare greyhound. Most of them sell at auction for up to £1,500. Quite a few of them sell in the £500 to £1,000 range. Then there are very few under 500 unless they're not in good condition, But assuming they're in good condition. And then there's maybe half a dozen that sell between 2,000 and 10 or 15,000 pounds. And then there's two or three that go up. The fox, the owl can both be close to 100,000 pounds even, certainly over 70 or 80. The comet can be 50,000 pounds. They were not that expensive at the time. There were certainly, there was no concept of rarity at the time, so rarity didn't factor into the value. But you could buy them retail for what would have been the equivalent of, I would think, under £100 today for most of them, maybe under 200 for even the big ones. So they were less expensive than modern Lalique is today. Let's put it that way.
Thank you. And Duncan also said some of these have been illuminated. I think you had some slides there of some of them that were illuminated. It's a bit grander than the Wolseley badge on his granddad's pub when he was little, which is
yes. Well, they are a bit grander, and a Wolseley is unlikely to have had a mascot anyway, because by the time Wolseleys appear, they tend to be more sloping front. But yeah, you could illuminate them. You'd need the full business for that, the larger Breves mount, but people did exactly that. And some of them, as I understand it, although I've never seen any evidence of this, but it's documented that you could run them on a magneto so that the faster you, or the greater your acceleration,
The
the
brighter.
greater intensity of light was thrown into the object, which is, when you think about it, it's a very Art Deco concept, that I think very much of that period. Yeah.
And then just one last thing I was curious about is obviously you said Lalique himself died in 45, I think, and post-war mascots weren't used, but did Lalique, the company, move into creating hood ornaments, or did they just stop at that point and concentrate on other things?
No, they didn't make, I mean, they still made some of the original designs. The company reopened in the late 40s and big way in 1951 under Lalique's son, Mark Lalique. They didn't make anything for automobiles, anything automobile related. I say that there was one little plaque with St. Christopher on it that you could put on a dashboard that they made in the 60s, but that's about it. No mascots and no hood ornaments now.
Great. Don't think we've got any other questions or comments. So I would just like to say thank you so much. It was a really fascinating talk. It's absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous design. It was beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us.
It was a great pleasure. Thanks to all in the UK and all at the Art Deco Society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and good night, everybody.